could you betray us like this, right here in front of everyone? I didn't do anything. You are being hysterical. Stop it right now. You can't talk to him like that.
The envelope was small, the kind used for thank you cards or birthday money, and it sat on the kitchen counter of Evelyn Hartwell's house on Habersham Road, like it had been waiting there a long time. Claire noticed it the moment she walked through the side door, the one the family always used, the one with the squeaky hinge that Daniel had been promising to fix for 3 years. She noticed the envelope, and she noticed Evelyn's hands around a coffee mug, steady and deliberate, the hands of a woman who had decided something. "You came early," Evelyn said. It was not a question. "I wanted a few minutes before everyone else arrived," Claire said. She set her purse on the chair by the window, the one with the needlepoint cushion Evelyn had made herself in 1987, and she stood in the middle of the kitchen and let herself breathe the smell of the place. Coffee and lemon soap and old wood, and something faintly floral that had lived in the curtains for as long as Claire had been coming here. 10 years of that smell, 10 years of that squeaky hinge. Evelyn pushed the envelope across the counter without a word. Claire looked at it. She did not pick it up right away. She had learned, in the past 7 weeks, to be careful about what she touched and when, about what she allowed herself to feel before she had confirmed she could afford to feel it. The therapist she had seen twice in September had called it compartmentalization and said it was not always healthy. Claire had stopped going to therapy after the second session, not because the therapist was wrong, but because she did not have room in her schedule for the luxury of being taken apart and put back together again. Not yet. She picked up the envelope. Inside was a folded photograph, printed on regular paper, the kind you print at home in a hurry, and a small card with 3 lines of Evelyn's handwriting, the cursive that Claire had seen on birthday cards and grocery lists, and, once, on a letter Evelyn had written to a congressman in 1994. The photograph showed Daniel and a woman Claire recognized from the parking structure outside the Hartwell construction offices on Peachtree Street. A Tuesday afternoon 6 weeks ago, when Claire had sat in a rented car 2 levels above them and watched them walk to his car with the ease of 2 people who had been doing this for a long time. The woman's name was Natalie Cruz. She was 31, a project coordinator at an architecture firm in Midtown. Claire knew this because she had paid a man named Gerald Foss $800 to find it out, and Gerald Foss had delivered a folder that contained more than she had asked for and less than she needed to walk into a courtroom feeling certain. The card said, "Corner office, Saturday. Bring your lawyer." Claire folded the photograph back into the envelope. She looked at Evelyn, who was watching her with the particular quality of attention that old women develop when they have lived long enough to know that most things people say are less important than what they do not say. "How long have you known?" Claire asked. "Long enough," Evelyn said. "Long enough to know I wasn't wrong about you when Daniel brought you home." Claire set the envelope in her purse, next to her phone, next to the business card for Margaret Ossie of Ossie and Tillman Family Law, which she had been carrying for 3 weeks without calling. "He told me this dinner was a chance to reconcile," she said. He used that word, reconcile. Evelyn made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Daniel uses words the way he uses a budget," she said, loosely and always in his own favor. She stood up from the counter and went to the stove and checked the oven for no reason Claire could identify, the gesture of a woman who needed something to do with her hands while she gathered herself. "He's bringing her tonight." Claire had known this was possible. She had dressed accordingly, which meant she had dressed the way she dressed for the annual Hartwell Construction Charity Gala. The dark green wrap dress that Daniel had once said made her look like someone people listened to. She had spent 40 minutes on her makeup, not to look beautiful for Daniel, who had stopped seeing her some time ago, but to look like a woman who had not been crying, because she had been crying, on and off, for 7 weeks, mostly in the parking garage of the Marriott off I-285, where she had been staying since she moved out of the house on Tuxedo Road. "I know," Claire said. "Are you going to be all right?" Claire considered the question seriously, the way it deserved to be considered. "Ask me Sunday," she said. Evelyn nodded once, the nod of a woman who accepted that as a fair answer. The Hartwell family dinner was held every third Saturday of October, a tradition that Robert Hartwell Sr. had begun when his children were young and that had persisted through divorces and relocations, and one memorable year when the eldest son, Marcus, had brought a college roommate who turned out to be his boyfriend, a fact that had taken the family 11 months to fully absorb. The dinner was held in the formal dining room, at the long walnut table that seated 12, under the chandelier that Evelyn had chosen in 1979 and that her daughter-in-law, Patricia, had been trying to replace ever since. The room smelled of roasted garlic and candle wax, and the flowers on the table were cream-colored dahlias, which was what the florist brought in October, without being asked. Claire arrived at the dining room at 6:53. Robert Sr. was in his chair at the head of the table, talking to his son Marcus and Marcus's husband James, who had driven down from Nashville for the weekend. Patricia was in the kitchen directing the catering staff with the focused energy of a woman who had once managed a department of 40 and now managed a house and found the second job harder. Evelyn was already seated at her usual place to the right of Robert Sr., a glass of sweet tea in front of her, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, even though there was nothing to read. Claire took her usual chair, to the right of Evelyn, and unfolded her napkin. At 7:04, Daniel walked in. He was wearing the charcoal blazer Claire had bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, which she noticed the way you notice a thing that used to mean something and now means something different. He was smiling, the broad, relaxed smile of a man who believed the room was arranged in his favor. He said hello to his father, clapped Marcus on the shoulder, kissed his mother's cheek, and then turned, and Natalie Cruz walked in behind him. She was attractive in a deliberate way, the way of a woman who had studied what was expected of her and worked to meet it precisely. She wore a cream blouse and tailored black trousers and low heels, and her hair was pulled back neatly, and she was carrying, Claire noticed, a bottle of wine, a Sonoma Cabernet, the kind that cost around $40, the kind you brought to dinner when you wanted to seem considerate without seeming like you were trying too hard. The room did something that was not quite silence, because the conversation did not stop entirely, but it changed quality, the way a room changes when someone opens a window and the temperature shifts before anyone has registered the draft. Natalie Cruz walked to the dining table and sat down. She sat in Claire's chair. Not the chair Claire was currently sitting in, but the chair Claire had sat in for 10 years before tonight, the chair to the right of Evelyn, the chair where Claire had sat for the dinner when Daniel proposed the Riverside project, and it saved the company, and for the dinner when Marcus came out to his grandmother before he came out to anyone else, and for the dinner 2 years ago when Robert Sr. had his first minor cardiac event, and they had all sat at this table afterward because no one knew what else to do. That chair. The chair beside Evelyn. Claire watched her sit down. Across the table, Marcus looked at Claire with an expression that asked a question she didn't have an answer for yet. Evelyn did not look at Natalie. She looked at Claire, the same steady attention from the kitchen, and Claire understood, with a clarity that surprised her with its calmness, what Evelyn was telling her. She was telling her, not yet. She was telling her, we are not doing this here, not this way, Not until we are ready. She was telling her, "Sit down." Claire sat down in the remaining empty chair, one seat farther from Evelyn than she had ever sat at this table, between Robert Sr.'s empty seat and the wall, and she picked up her napkin and arranged it in her lap and looked at the cream-colored dahlias in the center of the table. And she breathed, and she smiled at Marcus, who was still watching her with that question on his face. "James," she said, "how's the restaurant?" James, grateful for the rescue, began to talk about the restaurant. The soup was a butternut squash bisque, the same soup the caterer brought every October because it was what Robert Sr. had requested at the first of these dinners, and the family had never updated the order. Claire had eaten this soup 11 times. She knew, without tasting it, that it would be slightly too sweet, and that there would be a swirl of crème fraîche on top that would dissolve before you finish the first spoonful. She ate it slowly and listened to the table. Natalie Cruz ate her soup and talked. This was the thing Claire had not fully anticipated, though she understood it in retrospect as the obvious strategy. Natalie was not going to sit quietly and hope no one noticed her. She was going to make herself belong to the room. She asked Robert Sr. about the Buckhead renovation project she had heard so much about, and Robert Sr., who was susceptible to anyone who asked him about work, told her about it for 4 minutes without interruption. She told Patricia that the dahlias were beautiful and asked where the florist was, and Patricia said she didn't actually know. She just called, and they delivered. And Natalie said she would love to find a florist like that in Midtown. And Patricia smiled at her, the specific smile of a woman receiving a compliment she had been waiting for. Daniel watched all of this with a satisfaction that he was not quite concealing. He sat at Evelyn's left hand, the host's position, which was technically Marcus's seat, but Marcus had given it up without comment and moved down the table, and Daniel refilled glasses and passed the bread, and was, Claire recognized, performing the role of a man who has resolved a complicated situation and is now enjoying the resolution. He had not looked at Claire directly since he walked into the room. Marcus, 2 seats down from Claire, caught her eye once and tilted his head in the smallest possible gesture of solidarity. James, next to him, was talking to Claire about Nashville's restaurant scene with the focused courtesy of a man who understood that his job in this moment was to give her something to look at, other than her husband and the woman sitting in her chair. Claire was grateful for both of them. She was also, beneath the gratitude, working. Not visibly, not in any way that would read to the room as anything other than a woman eating soup and engaging in conversation, but working nonetheless, cataloging and assessing. She watched the way Natalie deferred to Daniel's opinions in front of his parents and contradicted them lightly in front of Marcus, calibrating her performance for each audience. She watched the way Daniel's hand moved to Natalie's wrist when he wanted her to stop talking, a small proprietary gesture that he had used on Claire at dinners years ago, before he stopped thinking of her as someone whose behavior reflected on him. She watched Patricia refill Natalie's water glass unprompted, which Patricia had never done for Claire in 10 years, and she filed this away not with bitterness, which she could not afford, but with precision. The soup plates were cleared. The main course arrived, a slow-roasted beef tenderloin with roasted fingerling potatoes and haricots verts, which was also what the caterer brought every year, and the conversation moved to the topics that always circulated at Hartwell family dinners: the business, the neighborhood, the vague gestures toward national politics that everyone made carefully because Robert Sr. and Marcus had been voting differently for 20 years, and both of them knew it. Natalie refilled her own wine glass and reached across to refill Daniel's without asking him first. The gesture of a woman who was used to his glass, who knew he would want more before he said so. Claire cut her beef and ate it. Beside her, the empty chair where she used to sit was close enough that she could have touched it without extending her arm. After the main course, when the catering staff was clearing plates, Natalie stood and walked to the sideboard where the dessert had been arranged, and on her way back, she paused at the display shelf beside the bookcase, the shelf where Patricia kept the family photographs. Claire had watched this happen the way you watch a scene in a film that you know is building toward something. Natalie picked up the wine bottle she had brought, set it on the shelf to move it off the table temporarily, and in doing so, she set it down directly on top of the silver-framed photograph of Claire and Daniel on their wedding day. The photograph that had sat on that shelf for 9 years, not covering it entirely, just resting the bottle's base over Daniel's face and Claire's shoulder, so that what remained visible was Claire's profile and the white of her dress and nothing else. Evelyn saw it. Claire saw Evelyn see it. Claire stood, slowly, and said she was going to get some water. She walked to the kitchen, filled a glass at the sink, and on her way back, she passed Evelyn's chair. She did not slow down. She did not look at Evelyn directly. But she was close enough to hear what Evelyn said, just barely above the noise of conversation and cutlery. A voice that was barely a whisper, but carried the weight of a pronouncement. "Not yet." Claire kept walking. She sat back down. She set her water glass on the table and reached for her napkin and looked at James, who was describing a chef's tasting menu, and she said, "That sounds remarkable," and meant it precisely as much as she needed to mean it in order to get through the next 40 minutes. Dessert was a pecan pie, also traditional, also slightly too sweet. And during dessert, Daniel told a story about the Riverside project that Claire had heard him tell before, and that was, as it had been the first time, mostly true. Robert Sr. laughed at the right moment. Patricia poured decaf. Natalie rested her chin on her hand and watched Daniel with the expression of a woman who had perfected the art of looking like she was seeing someone clearly for the first time, even though she had been looking at him for a while. After coffee, there was the period of a Hartwell dinner that Claire had always found the most demanding, the formless stretch after the meal when people were still seated or half-seated, and conversation became less structured and more personal, when the silences meant more. Robert Sr. and Daniel moved to the far end of the table to talk about a subcontractor issue that had apparently needed discussing all evening. Patricia went to oversee the catering staff in the kitchen. Marcus and James drifted toward this bookcase with glasses of bourbon. That left Claire and Evelyn and Natalie at the near end of the table. Natalie turned to Evelyn with a smile that was genuinely warm, which was the most unsettling thing about her, that the warmth was real. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "Daniel has told me so much about you. He says you're the one who taught him to read a balance sheet before he learned long division." Evelyn looked at her with an expression that was not unkind and not warm, the expression of a woman doing a careful and private calculation. "Daniel tends to give me credit for his virtues," she said, "and take credit for his faults himself. I've always thought that was backward." Natalie laughed, uncertain whether this was a joke. Evelyn did not clarify. Claire looked at the dahlias and thought about Saturday. Daniel found her in the hallway outside the powder room, which was either a coincidence or not, and Claire had stopped believing in coincidences where Daniel was concerned approximately 45 days ago. He was holding his bourbon glass loosely, a signal that he was feeling confident, and he had the look he got when he had prepared what he was about to say. Claire had lived with this man for 10 years, and she knew all his preparatory looks. "Can we talk?" he said. "We're talking," Claire said. He glanced down the hallway toward the dining room and then looked back at her, and she saw in that glance the same thing she had seen at the dinner table. A man who believed the room was arranged in his favor, and was now working to close the arrangement. "I have something for you," he said. He reached inside his blazer and took out a folded document. He held it out. Claire took it. She unfolded it partially, enough to see the header: Proposed Settlement Agreement. Hartwell versus Hartwell. She refolded it. "My attorney prepared it," Daniel said. "I want you to know I think it's fair. More than fair, given the circumstances." "Given what circumstances?" Claire asked. He shifted his weight slightly, not quite a flinch. "Given that we've both known for a while that this marriage has run its course." Claire looked at him for a long moment. She was aware of the powder room door at her back, and the sound of Marcus and James's conversation from the dining room, and the faint clink of the catering staff packing up in the kitchen. All the ordinary sounds of a dinner that had happened and was now concluding. She was aware of the document in her hand. "I'll read it tonight," she said. "Claire." His voice changed. It softened, which was more dangerous than when it was firm. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I want this to be clean. No courts, no... It doesn't have to be a public thing. I know how much you care about that." "You know how much I care about what?" "About how things look. About the community. Your career." He said your career with a faint hesitation that was almost imperceptible. Almost. But Claire heard it and understood it. Her career, which was grant writing and non-profit development, which did not generate income that compared to Hartwell construction, which Daniel had always treated as a thing she did rather than a thing she was. "I'll read it tonight," she said again. He looked at her for a moment longer, searching for something, and when he didn't find it, he nodded and went back down the hallway. She heard him say something to Natalie as he re-entered the dining room, his voice dropping to the register he used when he thought no one else could hear, and she heard Natalie respond with a short syllable that meant okay, or possibly good. Claire stayed in the hallway until she was sure her face was doing what she needed it to do. She drove home to the Marriott off I-285 at 9:47. She sat in the parking lot in her car for 11 minutes because the room felt small tonight, smaller than it usually felt, and she needed the size of the parking lot and the dark sky above the light poles and the distant sound of the interstate to hold some of what she was carrying before she went inside and carried it alone in a hotel room. She opened the settlement document on the center console under the dome light. It was 14 pages. She read all 14 pages, slowly, the way her college roommate Diane had taught her to read contracts, marking the sections that mattered with her thumbnail against the paper. It took her 22 minutes. When she was done, she set the document on the passenger seat and sat with it for a moment. The document offered her the house on Tuxedo Road, which she did not want, and which Daniel knew she did not want, because they had bought it together as an investment property, and it had never been the home she would have chosen. It offered her a cash settlement that was 30% of what she was entitled to under Georgia law, given that they had been married for 10 years and she had co-signed the refinancing of the Hartwell construction building in 2019. It offered her no stake in the company. It was not more than fair. It was, in fact, designed to look like more than fair while being less than she was owed, which was the kind of document you got when the person who prepared it was very good at their job and counted on the other party being too tired or too hurt or too eager for it to be over to read all 14 pages in a parking lot under a dome light. Claire's phone lit up with a text message from a number she did not recognize. She opened it. Just sign it. He's not coming back to you. You know that already. Why make it harder than it needs to be? No name. But she knew. She sat with the text message the way she had sat with the settlement document, reading it carefully, and then she set the phone face down on the passenger seat next to the document and got out of the car. In her room, she took off the dark green dress and hung it carefully and washed her face and sat on the edge of the bed in the hotel bathrobe and opened the envelope from Evelyn again and looked at the card. Corner office. Saturday. Bring your lawyer. She picked up her phone and opened her contacts. Margaret Osei, Osei and Tillman Family Law. She had been carrying this number for 3 weeks. She had called it once, left a message, and then not called back when Margaret returned the call, because she had not been ready, and she had told herself she was waiting until she had more, until the folder from Gerald Foss was complete, until she knew enough to walk into that office without feeling like she was walking in with nothing. She was ready now. She called. It was 10:43 on a Saturday night, and she did not expect an answer. But Margaret Osei answered on the 3rd ring, because Margaret Osei had given Claire her personal cell number 3 weeks ago and had been, apparently, waiting. "I'm sorry to call so late," Claire said. "Don't be," Margaret said. "Tell me where we are." Claire told her. She told her about the dinner and the settlement document and the text message and the photograph in Evelyn's envelope and the folder from Gerald Foss, and she told her about Evelyn's note. She told her all of it in the order it had happened, without editorializing, because Margaret was the kind of lawyer who preferred facts arranged chronologically and would do her own editorializing. When she was done, Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Saturday," Margaret said. "The corner office." "That's what the note says." "Claire," Margaret said, "do you know what Evelyn Hartwell's stake in that company is?" "She's a founding shareholder," Claire said. "Robert Sr. put 15% in her name when they incorporated. I don't know if she still holds it." "I'll find out by tomorrow morning," Margaret said. "Get some sleep. Bring that settlement document when you come in Monday." "And Claire." "Yes. Don't sign anything." "I know," Claire said. "I know." She slept better than she had in 7 weeks, which surprised her, and in the morning she drove to the Waffle House on Camp Creek Parkway, because she needed something that was not a hotel breakfast, and she sat at the counter and had scrambled eggs and coffee, and read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on her phone, and watched the short-order cook work the griddle with the efficiency of a man who had done exactly this for a very long time. And she thought that there was something reassuring about watching anyone do something well. Her phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Wear something that says, 'You know what you're doing.'" Claire smiled for the first time since Thursday. The corner office on the 14th floor of the Hartwell Construction Building on Peachtree Street had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, and on a clear Saturday morning in October, you could see all the way to the green ridge of Stone Mountain from the east-facing window, a view that Robert Sr. had arranged his desk to face when he ran the company, and that Daniel had rearranged to face the door when he took over, because Daniel preferred to see who was coming. Claire had always thought this said something important about the difference between the 2 men. She arrived at 9:55 in the charcoal blazer she wore to board meetings, and the dark trousers that Margaret Osei had once told her, offhandedly, made her look like someone who had read every document in the room. Margaret was with her, a woman of 52 with close-cropped natural hair and a leather portfolio that she carried with the ease of a weapon she had been carrying for 20 years. They had gone over everything twice the night before, in Margaret's conference room, and once more this morning over coffee, and Claire felt the particular quality of prepared that is not the same as calm, but will serve in its place. Evelyn was already in the conference room adjacent to the corner office when they arrived. She was seated at the head of the long table, which was not her usual seat, which was usually whatever seat was closest to the door. But today, she was at the head, and she had dressed with an intentionality that Claire recognized because she had been told to dress the same way. A deep blue dress suit that Claire had seen once before at Robert Sr.'s retirement dinner 6 years ago. Her reading glasses were on her face rather than pushed up in her hair. In front of her on the table was a manila folder and a glass of water, and nothing else. Beside her sat a man Claire did not know, who turned out to be Arthur Gaines of Gaines and Park, Estate and Corporate Law, who had been Evelyn Hartwell's personal attorney for 31 years, and who had, Margaret told Claire quietly, as they settled into chairs across the table, a reputation for being very quiet in rooms right up until the moment he wasn't. Daniel arrived at 10:03. He walked in still buttoning his cuff, which meant he had not expected an early start, and stopped when he saw the table. His eyes went to Margaret Osey first, then to Arthur Gaines, then to Claire, and then to his grandmother. And Claire watched him process the room the way he always processed rooms that had been arranged without him, which was with a brief stillness followed by a performance of composure. His own attorney, a younger man named Carson Webb, who handled most of Hartwell Construction's legal work, was 2 steps behind him and looked more openly surprised than Daniel allowed himself to. "Mother called this as an emergency shareholder meeting," said Patricia from the doorway, and Claire turned to see her standing just inside the room, and she looked, for the first time since Claire had known her, uncertain, which was not a thing Patricia Hartwell usually permitted herself to look. "She filed it Thursday. I didn't know until last night." Daniel looked at Evelyn. "Grandma," he said, and his voice was careful. "What is this?" Evelyn looked at him with an expression that was not unkind and was absolutely immovable. "It's a shareholders' meeting, Daniel," she said. "Sit down." He sat down. Arthur Gaines opened his portfolio without hurry and removed a set of documents and distributed them around the table with the economy of a man who did not believe in dramatic pauses but understood their function. Claire looked at her copy. It was a share transfer agreement. As the holder of 15% of Hartwell Construction, LLC, Arthur Gaines said, in the even tone of someone reading from a prepared statement, "Evelyn Louise Hartwell has exercised her right under the shareholder agreement to transfer her shares to a party of her choosing, effective upon the signature of the transferring party, which has already been obtained, and the acknowledgement of the remaining shareholders." Daniel's hand on the table went still. "The transferee," Arthur Gaines continued, "is Claire Ann Hartwell, née Beaumont." The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet, when something has happened that everyone in the room understands the weight of, and no one is quite ready to speak into. Carson Webb leaned toward Daniel and said something in a very low voice. Daniel did not respond to him. He was looking at his grandmother. "You can't do this," he said. "Grandma, you can't just—" "I can," Evelyn said. "I have." She opened the manila folder in front of her and took out a single sheet of paper and held it, and she read from it aloud, and her voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when the person speaking has been preparing to speak for a long time. "Claire Beaumont Hartwell has been a member of this family for 10 years, she read. In that time, she has managed the Hartwell Family Foundation's charitable giving account with skill and discretion that none of us acknowledged adequately. She arranged my care after my hip replacement in 2021 when Daniel was in Phoenix, and Robert was recovering himself, and Patricia was managing her mother's affairs. And she did this without being asked, and without mentioning it afterward. She settled a private debt of $37,000 owed by a member of this family from her own funds to prevent a legal matter that would have embarrassed all of us, and she has never spoken of it to anyone. Evelyn looked up from the paper and looked at Daniel. "I spoke to Gerald Foss," she said. "He told me he was hired by you 6 months ago to find something, anything, that would give you grounds to minimize her settlement. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. I've known that for 10 years. I needed you to know I know it." The silence in the room was different now. "Grandma," Daniel said, and his voice had changed, the performance of composure thinning to something that was either genuine regret or genuine alarm, and Claire could not tell which, and suspected it was both. "I made mistakes. I know that. But this," he gestured at the documents, "this is the company. This is Dad's company." "Your father's company," Evelyn said, "was built on the understanding that the people in this family looked after each other." She set the paper down carefully. "You brought a stranger to my table," she said, "and sat her in your wife's chair. In my chair. You did it in front of all of us, and you did not even ask. That told me everything I needed to know about who you are now, and about who you've decided the rest of us are." She folded her hands on the table. "I have made my decision." Daniel stood up. The chair scraped back. "I'll contest it," he said. "Carson." He looked at his attorney. "On what grounds can we contest this?" Carson Webb, to his credit, took a moment before he answered, the moment of a man choosing his words carefully. "Capacity," he said quietly. "We could argue she wasn't, that the decision wasn't made with full—" "I am 81 years old," Evelyn said, without raising her voice, "and I have full possession of every faculty I was born with, and several I developed on my own. You are welcome to test that in front of a judge." Margaret Osei, who had said nothing since she sat down, slid a document across the table to Carson Webb. "Mrs. Hartwell had a full cognitive evaluation conducted by Dr. Renee Abara at Emory on Tuesday," she said. "You'll find the results attached. You'll also find, behind tab C, the record of the charitable account management, and behind tab D, the documentation of the personal loan repayment." She looked at Daniel, not unkindly, not warmly. "We've been thorough." Natalie Cruz was not in the room, because she had not been invited to the room, because this was a shareholder meeting, and she was not a shareholder, and she was not family. Claire had thought about her, briefly, driving over, and had felt something that was not triumph and was not pity, but was the particular feeling of a person who has been waiting for a room to become what it actually is, and is now sitting in it. Daniel picked up his blazer from the back of the chair. He looked at Claire, and for a moment, the briefest possible moment, she saw something in his face that was not the man she had been cataloging and assessing for 7 weeks, but the man she had married, or a trace of him. Something that lived behind the performance and the strategy and the blazer he had worn tonight. She did not know what to do with that, and so she looked at it steadily, without expression, without coldness, and waited for him to look away. He looked away. "This isn't over," he said, and walked out. Carson Webb gathered his papers with the efficiency of a man who had been in rooms like this before and knew that the time for conversation was not now. He nodded to Margaret Osei in the way of attorneys who respect each other across adversarial lines and followed his client out. Patricia remained in the doorway. She was looking at her mother-in-law with an expression that Claire had never seen on her face, something between acknowledgement and something that might eventually become shame. She did not say anything. After a moment, she left. Evelyn reached across and touched the back of Claire's hand, once, briefly, the touch of a woman who did not make unnecessary gestures. "Tab D," Claire said quietly. "I didn't know you knew about the loan." "I know everything that happens in this family," Evelyn said. "I always have. I simply choose what to do about it carefully." She straightened the paper in front of her. "We'll let Arthur and Margaret handle the paperwork. I'd like some coffee. Is there coffee in this building on a Saturday?" "There's a place on the corner," Claire said. "Good," Evelyn said. "Let's walk." The letter from Carson Webb's office arrived on Tuesday, and Margaret called Claire at 8 in the morning to tell her what was in it before the physical copy reached her. Claire was standing in the kitchen of the Marriott suite. She had upgraded to a suite, a decision she had made 2 days after the shareholders' meeting, and that felt each morning when she woke up in a room large enough to contain a sitting area like a small act of self-respect. And she listened to Margaret read the relevant section aloud. And when Margaret was done, there was a silence between them that was not empty. "He's filing on capacity grounds," Margaret said. "They want a second cognitive evaluation, their own doctor, and they're arguing that Evelyn's relationship with you constitutes undue influence. They're also requesting a temporary injunction to freeze the share transfer until the matter is resolved." Claire set her coffee mug down on the counter. Outside the window, the morning was clear and pale, the particular flat morning light of Atlanta in October that made everything look clean and slightly distant. How long would a temporary injunction take to resolve? If he gets it, 6 to 8 months minimum, maybe longer if they drag the evaluation process out. 6 to 8 months. Claire turned this over. A transfer injunction meant she couldn't exercise the shares. It also meant Evelyn would be subjected to a formal legal process questioning her mental competence, which Daniel and his lawyers would use not because they believed it, but because it was available. Because it was a lever, and they needed a lever. And because the most efficient way to come at Claire was to come at the woman who had given her something. That was the part that Claire had been sitting with since Margaret's call. The part that had no clean answer. The shareholders' meeting, the documentation, Margaret's preparation, all of it had been built to withstand a legal challenge. The documentation was solid. The evaluation from Emory was solid. But 6 to 8 months meant 6 to 8 months of Evelyn's name in a legal proceeding, 6 to 8 months of her having to answer questions about her own mind, and Evelyn was 81 and healthy and fierce, and none of that changed the fact that having your competence questioned in a formal legal process was an experience that extracted a cost, regardless of the outcome. Claire called Evelyn. Evelyn picked up on the second ring. "I've heard," she said. "Margaret just told me," Claire said. "Evelyn, I want to talk to you about whether we should—" "Claire," Evelyn said, and her voice was the voice from the conference room, not unkind, entirely immovable. "I have been in legal proceedings before. Robert Sr. and I once spent 14 months in a dispute with a contractor who tried to claim creative ownership of a building design that our architect conceived. I was 53, and I sat in a deposition for 4 hours and answered every question they asked me, and I went home and made dinner. I am not fragile." "I know you're not fragile," Claire said. "I'm not worried about that." "Then what are you worried about?" Claire looked out the window at the pale October light. "I'm worried that he's doing this to punish both of us, because he doesn't have any other way to reach us." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "That's probably right. Does it change what's true?" "No." "Then we proceed," Evelyn said. "But you should go talk to him first." Claire had been thinking this herself, which was why hearing it from Evelyn felt like a confirmation rather than a suggestion. "You think it'll change anything?" I think you have things you need to say, Evelyn said, that you didn't say at the table and that you didn't say in the conference room. I think you've been carrying them since well before any of this started. And I think, I've seen this before, Claire, I think you cannot move forward with any fullness until you've said them. Not for him. He may not hear you at all. But for you. Claire drove to the house on Tuxedo Road that afternoon. She still had a key because no one had asked for it back, which was either an oversight or a statement. She rang the bell anyway. Daniel opened the door in a quarter of the time it would take to be surprised, which meant he was home and had been expecting someone or had been expecting her. He was in a t-shirt and jeans, which was unusual for a weekday afternoon, and he looked, she thought, tired in a way that went beneath the surface, the tiredness of a person who has been maintaining a performance and is now in their own house on a Tuesday afternoon, too depleted to maintain it. "I'm not here to negotiate," Claire said. "I'm not here about the injunction. I just want to talk." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he stepped back from the door. They sat in the kitchen, not the living room, not the formal spaces, the kitchen with its morning light, and the coffee machine that Claire had picked out, and the window above the sink that looked onto the back garden where the Japanese maple had gone red. Claire sat at the kitchen table. Daniel leaned against the counter. Neither of them made coffee. "The injunction," Claire said. "If you go forward with it, it will take longer and cost more than settling the transfer, and you will lose. You know you'll lose, and Carson Webb knows you'll lose. You're filing it because you're angry, and because you want there to be a consequence, and I understand that. I do. I know what it is to want something you've done to have cost something." Daniel said nothing. "What I want you to hear," Claire said, "is not about the company, or the shares, or what I'm entitled to under Georgia law. Margaret will handle all of that, and she will handle it well." She looked at him across the kitchen, across the table they had eaten breakfast at for 10 years. "I want to tell you that I saw what you were doing before I saw what you'd done. I saw it before Natalie. I saw you decide that I had become something you managed rather than someone you were with, and I told myself that was temporary, that it was the pressure of the company, that it would shift when things settled. I told myself that for a long time. I don't know when I stopped telling myself that. I think I stopped and didn't let myself know I'd stopped." She paused. "I'm telling you now because I spent a long time not telling anyone, including myself, and I'm done with that." Daniel was looking at the floor. His jaw was set. But she had known this man's face for 11 years, and she could see, beneath the set jaw, the quality of a person actually listening. Not hearing and deflecting. Listening. "I didn't," he began. "You don't have to explain it to me," Claire said. "I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm asking for the injunction to be dropped." He looked up. "Not because of the shares," she said. "Drop it, because your grandmother is 81 years old, and she made a choice with her own property about someone she chose to give it to, and she should not have to sit in a deposition answering questions about her mind because you are angry at me." Her voice remained even because she needed it to remain even, not because she did not feel the anger, because she did. She had felt it for weeks, and she had placed it carefully in the compartment that held things she could not act on yet. But it was there, and she let him see that it was there. "She went into that conference room for me," Claire said. "I'm asking you not to make her pay for that." The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, a mockingbird was somewhere in the Japanese maple, making the succession of sounds that mockingbirds make, working through its catalog. Daniel pushed off the counter and went to the sink, and stood with his back to her for a moment. Then he turned around. "I'll call Carson today," he said. Claire looked at him. She waited to feel something decisive, and felt instead something more diffuse. The release of a pressure she had been holding so long she had forgotten it was pressure, the way you don't realize you've been cold until you step inside. "Thank you," she said. She meant it simply, without residue. The thank you of a person who has been given what they asked for and does not need it to mean more than that. She drove home. She had started thinking of the hotel as home, provisionally, and was beginning to understand that home was something she would have to build from other material now. And she was on I-285, heading north, when her phone rang through the car speakers. Evelyn. "Well?" Evelyn said. "He'll drop it." Evelyn made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite satisfaction, but was something that contained both. "Come have coffee Saturday morning," she said. "I want to show you something." Saturday morning was gray and cool, the last of October wearing its late-week face, and Evelyn met Claire at the side door on Habersham Road, the one with the squeaky hinge. The house was quiet, in the way it was quiet when Robert Sr. was out, the full quiet of old rooms and good insulation. Evelyn led her to the kitchen and poured coffee and set a plate of biscuits on the table between them. The biscuits she made herself, from a recipe she had received from her own grandmother, and that she had never written down because she said anyone who couldn't make a biscuit from memory didn't deserve the recipe. Claire ate a biscuit and drank her coffee. Evelyn was looking out the window at the back garden, which in October was mostly dormant, the crepe myrtles bare, the grass the color of dried straw. "When Robert Sr. and I were first married," Evelyn said, without preamble, the way she had of beginning stories in their middle, "we lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Marietta that cost $112 a month. Robert had $200 to his name, and a drafting table, and an idea about building houses for people who couldn't afford the houses that were being built. I had a job at an insurance company that I was good at, and that I left when Daniel's father was born because that was what women did in 1969, and I never stopped working. I just stopped being paid for it for a while." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "I want to tell you that because I want you to know that when I gave you those shares, I understood what I was giving. I understood what it means for a woman to have a stake in something that will outlast the particular configuration of her personal life." Claire set down her cup. "You are going to be fine," Evelyn said. It was not comfort, not exactly. It was a statement of fact from a woman who had lived long enough to tell the difference between a person who would be fine and a person who would not. "Not immediately, not this week, but you will be fine." "I know," Claire said, and she did know. She had known it in the Waffle House in the morning light, watching the short-order cook work the griddle, and she had known it in the parking lot of the Marriott, and she had known it in Daniel's kitchen, hearing the Mockingbird work through its catalog. She had known it in the way that knowing something and believing something are two separate acts that sometimes happen together and sometimes years apart, and today, for the first time, they were happening together. Evelyn reached into the pocket of her cardigan and placed something on the table between them. A key, old-fashioned, the kind that fit a door lock rather than a deadbolt, worn smooth on the bow from years of being carried and handled. "The cottage in Savannah," Evelyn said. "Bull Street. My mother's house, then mine, and now no one's because none of my children ever wanted it, and I've been renting it to a professor from SCAD for the past 8 years, but his lease is up in January." She pushed the key slightly closer to Claire. "A woman should always have a place that's only hers. I've believed that since I was young, and I didn't always have the circumstances to act on it. You do." Claire looked at the key on the table between them. She thought about the apartment in Marietta that cost $112 a month, and the insurance company job, and the drafting table, and the biscuit recipe that had never been written down. She thought about the side door with the squeaky hinge, and the dahlias on the table, and the chair where she had sat for 10 years, and the chair she had been told to wait in, and the one she was sitting in now. She picked up the key. It was warm from Evelyn's pocket, the warmth of something carried close, and it fit in her hand the way things fit when they have been made to a human scale, and she held it for a moment before she put it in her own pocket, and she thought that this was what it felt like when one door closed and another one's key was already in your hand before you'd looked for it. Not easy, not immediate, not without the cost of what had come before, but real and already started, and already hers. The coffee was warm and the biscuits were gone, and the gray October light was doing what gray October light does in Georgia, which is to filter through everything gently and make even the dormant garden look like something resting rather than something finished, something pausing before its next version of itself. Some lessons come to you cleanly, like a door opening. Others have to be paid for in installments over the course of years, in hotel parking lots and kitchen tables and conference rooms and hallways outside powder rooms. What Claire Beaumont Hartwell would understand, fully, later, was that the lesson was never about Daniel, and never about Natalie, and never even about the chair at the dinner table, or the shares or the key to a cottage on Bull Street in Savannah. The lesson was about the particular kind of strength it takes to wait until you know what you're doing before you act, and about the women who teach you that strength not by explaining it, but by demonstrating it in rooms where they have every reason to stay silent and choose, instead, to speak. It was about the alliances that form in kitchens rather than boardrooms, between people who understand that loyalty is not a word, but a record of actions, accumulated quietly over time. And it was about this, that what belongs to you will not always stay in your hands through sheer wanting, but that if you have done the work of being the kind of person who deserves it, and if you have been lucky enough to be seen clearly by someone with the wisdom and the will to say so, it has a way of finding its way back.